The saber-tooth's lost rival, why the T-Rex's design dominated before the Ice Age giants. 20,000 years before your civilization carved its first writing, before agriculture existed, before cities rose, the American continent belonged to creatures so perfectly engineered for killing that they make our modern apex predators look like children playing with toys. Saber-tooth cats roamed from the tar pits of California to the grasslands of Texas, and for thousands of years they were unstoppable. They were the design that won, they were the template. And then something happened that nobody talks about, something that reveals why their dominance ended so suddenly, and why the lessons from that failure are still written in the bones we dig up today. Stay with me to the end, because I'm going to show you the single reason the saber-tooth's reign collapsed. A reason that has nothing to do with climate, nothing to do with meteor impacts or competition, and everything to do with a design flaw that was hiding in plain sight. The design they inherited from their reptilian ancestors 60 million years ago. If you're someone who finds yourself reading about extinct predators at 3 in the morning, or watching Ice Age documentaries until your eyes burn, hit subscribe right now. Every single week on this channel we uncover the real stories of these giants, the mechanics of their hunts, the structure of their societies, the moment everything changed. And I'd genuinely like to know, drop a comment down below and tell me which Ice Age predator you think was deadliest. Saber-tooth, dire wolf, or something else entirely. Now here's the critical piece before we go deeper. If you want the full breakdown of saber-tooth mechanics, hunting strategies, pack behavior, and the evidence behind everything I'm telling you, the complete anatomical guide on these predators, with diagrams, fossil comparisons, and the research papers themselves, that's all waiting in the description and pinned in the top comment. It's not free. It's a resource built specifically for people who want to understand these animals the way scientists do, not just know their names. The moment saber-tooth cats first appeared on the North American continent, they weren't the apex predators yet. That title belonged to animals that had already been perfected by 66 million years of mammalian evolution. No, wait, that's wrong. They inherited the design from something older. The saber-tooth cat's killing apparatus came directly from the Thylacosmilus, the marsupial saber-tooth that hunted through the forests of South America. But the North American version improved on it, stronger, faster, deadlier. For nearly 40,000 years, almost 200 human generations, the saber-tooth cat owned this continent absolutely. The fossil record from the La Brea tar pits near Los Angeles alone has yielded over 2,000 individual saber-tooth skeletons. 2,000. That number tells you something crucial. They weren't rare visitors to those killing fields. They were drawn there in waves, generation after generation, because those tar seeps were killing machines for prey, and the saber-teeth came to feast. The design was brilliant. The canines, those famous fangs, could reach 7, sometimes 8 inches in length. Not for show. They were precision instruments designed to pierce the vulnerable throat and belly of large Ice Age herbivores. Bison, camels, ground sloths weighing 3 tons. The saber-tooth's entire body was engineered around those teeth. Massive forelimbs and shoulders to pin prey, a flexible spine, muscles stacked on muscle. When you look at the skeleton, every single component serves that one purpose: deliver those canines to the exact spot that guarantees a kill. And for thousands of years, this design absolutely dominated. No other predator could match the saber-tooth's ability to take down prey 3, 4, sometimes 5 times its own body weight. Dire wolves hunted in packs. We'll come back to that. But the saber-tooth? The saber-tooth didn't need company. One animal, one set of those canines. That was enough. Yet something shifted, not gradually, suddenly. Between roughly 12,000 and 10,000 years ago, the saber-tooths began to disappear. Within a few centuries, they were gone, extinct. And the question everyone asks is always the same. Climate change, human hunting, disease, those were the easy answers. But the real answer is much stranger, and it goes all the way back to the reptile brain. Here's what most paleontologists miss when they reconstruct the late Pleistocene. They focus on the predators, the saber-tooths, the dire wolves, the short-faced bears. But the real story isn't about the hunters. It's about what they hunted. Prey drive everything. Change the herbivores, and you change the entire predator guild that evolved to take them down. 20,000 years ago, North America's megafauna landscape looked radically different from what it was 10,000 years later. Mammoths roamed the continental interior. Mastodons stood in the wetlands and coniferous forests. Giant ground sloths, creatures the size of elephants, stripped vegetation from trees across the southern plains and deserts. Camels still lived here, horses that weren't the ones we'd later reintroduce. Bison with horns that spanned 8 feet from tip to tip. The prey base was phenomenally diverse, phenomenally abundant. The saber-tooth evolved to hunt in that world. Those 17-centimeter canines weren't random mutations. They were precision instruments built specifically for penetrating the thick hide and reaching the vital organs of Pleistocene megafauna. A saber-tooth's bite force was weak compared to a modern lion's, only around 1,000 pounds per square inch. But that wasn't the point. The canines did the real work. They were designed to slip between ribs, to sever the spinal cord, to puncture the throat of an animal restrained by the predator's front limbs. This required a very specific kind of prey, large prey, slow-moving prey, prey that couldn't outrun a saber-tooth or dodge its attacks with the kind of agility that smaller, faster herbivores possessed. Exactly the kind of prey that filled North America for the last 3 million years. But between 12,000 and 10,000 years ago, something fundamental shifted in the climate. The ice sheets that had dominated the northern latitudes began a rapid retreat. Temperatures climbed, rainfall patterns changed, vegetation shifted. Forests expanded into areas that had been open grassland. Grassland replaced shrubland. The entire structure of North American ecosystems transformed within just a couple of thousand years. Now hold on, I need your complete attention for something crucial here. This climatic transition didn't just rearrange where plants grew. It triggered a cascade through the entire food web. As vegetation changed, the herbivores that depended on specific plant communities began to struggle. Some adapted, others didn't. Mammoths, for instance, were already living on the edge of their ecological range. They depended on cold-adapted vegetation and grazing grounds that required a certain climate to maintain. As winters became less severe and summers grew warmer, the grasses and sedges that mammoth herds relied on began to disappear. If you want to truly understand what happened to the saber-tooth, the actual mechanism, the sequence of ecological failure that triggered its extinction, you need the complete guide. It's available in the description and pinned in the top comment. This resource walks you through the predator-prey dynamics of the late Pleistocene, the specific vegetation shifts that sealed the herbivore's fate, and how saber-tooth populations collapsed not because they were hunted or outcompeted, but because their primary food source simply vanished. It's the kind of depth most documentaries skip over, and frankly, once you understand these connections, you see extinction in an entirely different way. The ground sloths suffered first. These enormous creatures, some weighing as much as a modern elephant, depended on browsing vegetation at heights most other herbivores couldn't reach. As forests expanded and vegetation composition shifted away from the open woodlands they preferred, ground sloth populations crashed. Within a few centuries, the species that had dominated southern North America for millions of years were functionally extinct across vast regions. Then came the camels and horses, smaller than mammoths and mastodons, yes, but still megafauna by any reasonable definition. These animals required specific grassland habitats that were being replaced by closed forest. They couldn't adapt fast enough. Their populations fragmented. Small, isolated groups of horses and camels clung to refugia in the desert southwest, but the broad continental herds that had existed just 1,000 years earlier were gone. By 10,000 years ago, The prey base that had sustained saber-tooth populations for 300,000 years had essentially collapsed. Not all at once, but fast enough that saber-tooth evolution couldn't keep pace. The problem was structural. A saber-tooth's entire body plan, its short legs, its massive shoulders, its reliance on stealth and close-range ambush, was built for an ecosystem of slow, large herbivores. When those herbivores vanished, a saber-tooth couldn't simply evolve longer legs and become a pursuit predator. Evolution doesn't work like that. What the saber-tooth could do was hunt the remaining megafauna. Mammoths still existed in scattered populations. So did mastodons. Ground sloths persisted in certain regions. But the density was wrong. A saber-tooth hunting territory that once supported encounters with dozens of potential prey animals per season now had only a handful. Starvation followed. Then, extinction. The final chapters of the saber-tooth's reign were written in silence. No roar, no struggle. Just the gradual tightening of a noose that the animal couldn't see coming. Competition intensified on multiple fronts. Dire wolves, which had adapted far more successfully to hunting smaller, faster prey, began to dominate ecosystems the saber-tooth once controlled. These pack hunters didn't need the dense megafauna. They could thrive on bison, camels, horses, animals that had learned to move faster, scatter more efficiently, survive in ways that made them harder targets for an ambush predator. The T-Rex, by contrast, had dominated through raw anatomical perfection. Its design was so brutally efficient that it faced virtually no competition. Other carnosaurs existed during the Cretaceous, sure, but they occupied different niches or different continents. The T-Rex didn't have to fight for its place. It was the apex, period. The saber-tooth, by the end of the Pleistocene, found itself in a radically different position. It was being outcompeted, outmaneuvered. Pushed toward extinction not by a single superior rival, but by a whole ecosystem reshaping itself around changing climate and prey availability. And yet here's what makes the comparison so revealing. Hold on, I need your full attention for a moment here. The saber-tooth's extinction wasn't a failure of design. It was a failure of flexibility. The T-Rex's dominance lasted because the Cretaceous climate remained relatively stable for millions of years. The dinosaur's prey base didn't collapse. Its ecological role didn't become redundant. The saber-tooth, by contrast, evolved in an ecosystem that was always changing. Ice ages came and went. Grasslands expanded and contracted. Megafauna populations fluctuated wildly. A predator designed for one specific hunting strategy in one specific ecosystem state was always going to be vulnerable when those conditions shifted. Before we continue deeper into this comparison, I want to point something out. The mechanics behind why one predator dominates and another fades, the rules of competition, the signals that determine which design succeeds across time, those are mapped out in detail in our complete guide on Pleistocene predator ecology. You'll find that ebook linked in the description and pinned in the top comment. It's a paid resource, but it breaks down the exact systems that separated the saber-tooth from its rivals in ways we can only touch on here. What we can explore here is the practical reality. 10,000 years before present, humans were arriving in North America in increasing numbers. This wasn't the sole cause of megafauna extinction. That's a myth we've mostly moved past in serious paleontology. Climate was doing the real work. But human arrival did accelerate the collapse. Hunting pressure on megafauna increased. Prey animals became even scarcer. The saber-tooth starvation accelerated. The T-Rex never faced this pressure. It existed in a world without humans. It hunted in relative abundance until the asteroid impact fundamentally reorganized the planet's atmosphere and food chain. Quick, catastrophic, universal. Every large predator on Earth faced the same crisis simultaneously. The saber-tooth faced something slower but equally relentless. Gradual resource depletion, changing competitor landscape, a body plan that couldn't adapt fast enough. By 8,000 years ago, saber-tooth populations in most of North America had collapsed to isolated remnants. Some populations persisted longer in specific refugia, certain valleys in California, perhaps some canyon systems in the southwest, but even these dwindled rapidly. The La Brea tar pits preserve the grim mathematics of this end. Thousands of saber-tooth remains have been excavated from those pits, more predator fossils than herbivore fossils, which tells you everything. Desperate animals lured by the smell of herbivores already trapped in the tar died by the hundreds trying to extract a meal from a death trap. The pits became an efficient machine for concentrating saber-tooth extinction. The T-Rex never left deposits like this, didn't need to. It had already been extinct for 65 million years by the time the ice ages even began. The contrast is sharp. One predator ruled through overwhelming anatomical superiority and prey abundance. The other tried to rule through specialization and was destroyed by the same specialization when conditions changed. The T-Rex's design was so dominant that it faced no real rivals. The saber-tooth's design was so specialized that it couldn't survive the loss of its prey base. Different problems, different timelines, different extinctions. But both tell you something essential about what it takes to be an apex predator and what happens when the world decides it no longer needs you. The saber-tooth evolved into a machine built for one thing only: precision killing of large herbivores. That singular focus made it lethal in its moment, but precision, when the world shifts, becomes a liability. The T-Rex, by contrast, possessed something we might call anatomical flexibility, not in the sense that it could do many things well, but in the sense that it could survive on a broader spectrum of prey. A juvenile T-Rex hunted differently than an adult. It could tackle armored dinosaurs or smaller fleeing creatures. It could chase. It could ambush. It could hunt in groups or alone. That versatility, built into its very skeleton, meant the species didn't live or die on the availability of one particular prey animal. The saber-tooth's canines drove downward with tremendous force, but they required a very specific strike angle. Miss that angle by inches, and the kill became a prolonged struggle. The T-Rex's teeth were designed to grip and tear almost regardless of where they made contact. Two approaches, both deadly, but one left no room for error. The other allowed for variation. Now here's where the story becomes critical to understanding extinction itself. When the ice ages transformed the continent, the prey base didn't simply disappear. It changed. The herbivores that survived the climate shift were leaner, faster, more dispersed across the landscape. The giant ground sloths retreated into shrubland. The camels and horses moved into open country where pursuit required raw speed. The mammoths clustered in colder refugia. These weren't extinctions, not yet. They were relocations, reorganizations of where and how prey lived. A predator built for dense forests and surprise ambush on large, relatively stationary prey suddenly found itself in a world of sparse prey, open terrain, and faster prey dynamics. The saber-tooth's killing apparatus remained unchanged. Its prey had moved the goalpost, and it couldn't follow. Before we continue, I need you to really absorb this next part, because it changes how you think about why the saber-tooth lost its dominance. If you want the complete breakdown of how predator-prey relationships governed the collapse of Ice Age megafauna, the signals that predicted extinction, and the ecological mechanisms that determined which species survived and which didn't, that's all explained in the comprehensive guide available in the description and pinned in the comments. This isn't surface-level material. It's the deep mechanics of why the world shifted the way it did. The T-Rex had been gone for 65 million years, so it never had to adapt to Ice Age conditions. It never faced this test. We can never know if its design would have handled the Pleistocene better, but we do know this: the animals that survived the Ice Ages tended to be the generalists. Wolves hunted anything from bison to caribou to each other if necessary. Bears were omnivores. They ate plants, fish, meat, whatever the season offered. Even the mammoths, despite their size, showed tremendous dietary flexibility, browsing on diverse plants depending on local availability. The saber-tooth was a specialist in a world increasingly demanding specialists to be something else. Fossil evidence from tar deposit sites shows something striking. In the earliest layers, saber-tooth remains are abundant relative to their prey. In later layers, the ratio shifts. Fewer saber-teeth dying at the sites, fewer herbivores too, but the herbivores decline at a steeper rate. This isn't accidental. It's the signature of a predator losing access to its food source. The saber-tooth didn't adapt. It starved slowly, then catastrophically. The T-Rex model, anatomical dominance combined with dietary flexibility, never had to prove itself in the ice ages because it had already become extinct millions of years earlier. We can say with certainty that the T-Rex's design conquered the Cretaceous. We cannot say the same about how it would have fared in the Pleistocene. But here's what we can measure. Predators that ruled their era often possessed a kind of overkill capacity in their design. The T-Rex didn't need to be perfect. It just needed to be more overwhelming than anything hunting the same prey. The saber-tooth, by the Ice Ages, was hunting prey that no longer existed in the densities it depended on. Same landscape, different animals, different availability. Same teeth. One design won because it didn't rely on perfection. The other lost because it did. When the Ice Ages arrived, the playing field shifted entirely. Temperatures plummeted. Grasslands replaced forests. Prey animals that had sustained the saber-tooth for millennia either went extinct or migrated into territories the big cats couldn't follow. The T-Rex had already vanished 63 million years before this happened. It never faced the test, but its design, the principle behind it, would have mattered. Consider what the Pleistocene actually demanded from a predator. You needed to hunt animals that were faster, tougher, and more widely distributed than anything the Cretaceous offered. Mammoths weren't confined to dense jungle. They ranged across entire continents. Ground sloths moved in unpredictable patterns. Horses and camels, which thrived during the Ice Ages, scattered across grasslands where visibility was enormous. A predator couldn't rely on ambush alone. It couldn't depend on a single prey species sustaining its entire population. The T-Rex's advantage was overwhelming bite force and the ability to take down virtually anything. The saber-tooth's advantage was specialized killing precision. Precision fails when your prey becomes rare or mobile. Here's where we need to pause for a moment. This comparison matters because it reveals something fundamental about evolutionary design. Dominance isn't permanent, it's contextual. A predator that's perfect for one world becomes a liability in another. The T-Rex ruled because its world was predictable. Dense vegetation, limited prey diversity, high population densities in confined spaces. Overwhelm your prey with sheer force, and you win. But shift the variables, open up the landscape, scatter the prey, introduce climate chaos, and that same design becomes inflexible. The saber-tooth learned to be specific instead. It learned to kill in a particular way, with weapons refined over millions of years for a particular type of prey. That specificity was brilliant for the Pliocene and early Pleistocene. It was catastrophic for the late Pleistocene. Now, before we continue, I need you to understand something crucial about this entire argument. The patterns we're discussing, flexibility versus specialization, overkill capacity versus refined precision, these operate across every apex predator that's ever existed. And if you want to understand not just the saber-tooth and the T-Rex, but the entire architecture of how predators think, hunt, and ultimately survive extinction, our complete guide to predatory design and adaptation is available in the description and pinned in the top comment. This is a paid resource, but it goes much deeper into the biomechanics, the behavioral strategies, and the evolutionary trade-offs that determined which predators thrived and which didn't. You'll find it there. The dire wolves that roamed North America during the Ice Ages offer us something the fossil record rarely gives us, a middle ground. They weren't as specialized as the saber-tooth. They weren't as overwhelmingly dominant as the T-Rex. What they were was adaptable. Dire wolves hunted in packs. They scavenged. They could take down mammoths with coordinated strategy, but they could also survive on smaller prey when mammoths weren't available. That flexibility kept them alive until the very end of the Pleistocene. The saber-tooth, by comparison, was locked into a narrower survival strategy: solitary hunting, ambush predation, massive canines optimized for bringing down large herbivores in close quarters. When those herbivores disappeared or became scarce, the saber-tooth had no backup plan. Unlike the dire wolf, it couldn't pivot to pack hunting. Unlike the T-Rex's descendants, which evolved into smaller, more agile predators, the saber-tooth's body plan didn't allow for rapid specialization shifts. This is the crucial distinction. The T-Rex's design would have failed in the Ice Ages not because it was weak, but because it was committed to a principle of dominance that Ice Age ecology didn't reward. The saber-tooth failed because it was committed to a principle of specialization that Ice Age scarcity punished. Both designs were victories in their time. Both were catastrophes in a different time. And this brings us to the revelation I promised you at the beginning of this video. The saber-tooth's lost rival wasn't the T-Rex. It was time itself. The T-Rex dominated its world so completely that its very success became its template for predatory design. For 165 million years, that template worked. Massive size, overwhelming bite force, the strategy of being too large, too powerful, too devastating to fail. Evolution kept building on it because evolution doesn't plan ahead, it copies what works. But when the continents shifted, when the climate cooled, when the ice ages arrived and reshaped North America into grasslands and open tundra, that template became obsolete. The world didn't need a dominance predator anymore. It needed something else entirely. The dire wolf understood this. Its pack structure, its ability to take down prey through coordination rather than individual power, its willingness to scavenge when hunting failed. These weren't inferior versions of the T-Rex's strategy. They were completely different answers to a completely different question. The question wasn't how do I dominate anymore. It was how do I survive scarcity? The saber-tooth never found that answer. It was too specialized, too dependent on the one thing it did better than anything else, that killing bite. When large herbivores became harder to find, when the climate forced prey animals to spread out across vast distances, the saber-tooth's advantages evaporated. It couldn't hunt in packs like the dire wolf. It couldn't switch to smaller prey with the same efficiency. Its massive canines became liabilities in a world that no longer had enough large prey to justify carrying them. The irony is brutal. The saber-tooth inherited the same legacy the T-Rex did. Millions of years of evolutionary success based on a single, devastating advantage. But the T-Rex's descendants managed what the saber-tooth could not. As the climate shifted between the ice ages and the warming periods that followed, smaller tyrannosaur lineages survived. They adapted. They became different creatures. The modern birds you see today are direct descendants of that lineage, still carrying that predatory intelligence, still benefiting from the architectural efficiency the T-Rex perfected. The saber-tooth had no such descendants. Its body plan was a dead end. Dead end not because it was inferior, but because it was inflexible. This is what the T-Rex's design teaches us about extinction and survival. Dominance is not the same as resilience. Power is not the same as adaptability. The creature that ruled absolutely in one world can be completely helpless in the next. The T-Rex didn't fail because something stronger came along. It failed because the rules changed, and its blueprint couldn't bend fast enough to meet them. The saber-tooth faced that same wall. It was the last of its kind, because it was the only kind it knew how to be. So when you look at the saber-tooth and the T-Rex, two apex predators separated by 68 million years and an entire geological epoch, you're not looking at a competition between superior and inferior designs. You're looking at two completely different solutions to two completely different worlds. The T-Rex's design was optimized for dominance through overwhelming force. It worked for 165 million years because the world rewarded that strategy. The Saber-Tooth's design was optimized for specialization through perfection of a single lethal tool. It worked for 3 million years because the world rewarded that strategy. When the world changed, both failed. But the T-Rex failed so completely that it almost took every mammal-sized creature with it. The saber-tooth failed quietly, in the shadows of the dire wolf's success, a predator that understood something fundamental about the Ice Age world that the saber-tooth never would. Your challenge this week is simple. Look at the systems you rely on, the strategies that have worked for you, the tools you've mastered, the ways you've always approached problems. Ask yourself which of these are built on dominance and which are built on adaptability. Because the world rewards both until suddenly it doesn't. The creatures that survived didn't always win through strength. Often, they won through flexibility. Thank you for walking through this prehistoric world with me. If these stories of Ice Age giants and their hidden lessons resonate with you, I'd genuinely love to hear which extinct predator fascinates you most. Drop a comment below and let me know. And if you haven't already, subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss when we explore the next chapter of these magnificent creatures and the lost ecosystems they inhabited.